Welcome to Shatter.
Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. It started with a sentence I'll never forget. I had just finished washing the dishes. We hadn't touched each other in over a week. She was scrolling through her phone on the couch, one leg tucked under the other like nothing in the world could bother her. I walked over, sat beside her, and tried to reconnect. Nothing dramatic, just closeness, just presence. I reached out, touched her hand, and said, "I miss us." She didn't even look at me, just kept scrolling and casually replied, "No thanks. I already did it today at work." That was the moment. The pause in time. The freeze frame before everything shattered. She said it like a joke. A twisted one. Like she was trying to shock me, or maybe just test me. But the way her smile faltered after she said it, that half second of too fast breathing, that wasn't a joke. That was a confession. I didn't yell. I didn't flinch. I just stood up and went to the bedroom. Closed the door. She didn't follow. That silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was surgical. Cold. Like something had been cut, and we both knew it wasn't going to be sewn back together. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and realized the version of her I'd been holding on to. The wife I thought I married didn't exist anymore. Maybe never did. I thought about the past 6 months. The overtime. The late meetings. The sudden shift in how she'd stop mid-kiss like she remembered something urgent. The guarded phone. The nights she came home smiling, but not because of anything I'd done. She'd already left the marriage. I was just the last one to get the memo. And maybe she thought I'd react. That I'd spiral. That I'd beg or accuse or try to reclaim something that had already been passed around behind my back. But I didn't. The next morning, I made her coffee, just like I always did. But I didn't sit with her. I didn't speak. I just placed the mug down, walked out the door, and drove. No destination. No music. Just the sound of tires and the echo of her words bouncing in my skull. At a red light, I opened my phone and made a list. Lawyer consultation. Separate bank account. Backup all files. Pull surveillance on my name from our home Wi-Fi. Not because I needed revenge, but because I was done being convenient. She wanted freedom? She just earned mine. The next morning, she acted like it never happened. She came into the kitchen in her robe, yawned like it was just another Wednesday, and asked if I'd seen her car keys. Her tone was light, sweet even, like she was hoping I'd forgotten what she said the night before. I hadn't, but I handed her the keys. I nodded. No words. I wasn't giving her a fight. I was giving her distance. And that unsettled her more than any confrontation would have. Because silence has weight. And mine. It landed with precision. I watched her as she poured her coffee. There was a slight shake in her hand she tried to hide. She glanced at me twice, waiting for a reaction. Waiting for me to call her out. Or maybe to plead for some explanation. But I wasn't interested in explanations anymore. I already knew enough. While she was at work, I took the day off and started preparing, quietly, efficiently. I opened a new checking account, transferred my paycheck details, and ordered a new phone. No shared data. No shared life. By the time she got home, the house looked the same. But I wasn't. She asked how my day was. I said, productive. That was it. She laughed, maybe a little too loud, and said, "You're quiet lately. You okay?" I nodded, then added, "Never been clearer." That was the first crack. She wasn't used to me not engaging. I used to be the one who tried to fix things. The one who asked how we could get back on track, who reached out after every cold night, who tried harder every time she pulled away. Not anymore. She kept the small talk going for a while, told me about some office drama, what her coworker wore, something about traffic. Her voice carried through the room like a performance she'd rehearsed. But I wasn't the audience anymore. She was playing a part for a man who had already exited the stage. That night, she tried to initiate intimacy. Light touches. A soft voice. She leaned in like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I told her I was tired. Turned away. Closed my eyes. I heard her shift beside me, restless. Not used to being ignored. What she didn't understand was that I wasn't rejecting her to hurt her. I was simply done performing for someone who'd already made me optional. She wanted a version of me who'd keep chasing her, who'd keep trying to win her back. But I wasn't chasing anyone anymore. She hadn't just crossed a line, she'd erased it. And now, she was the one trying to remember where it was. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need the truth. I already had something better, Clarity. And clarity is what gives a man the power to disappear without ever leaving the room. I wasn't digging. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't even curious anymore. But the truth has a habit of showing up when you least expect it, and when it does, it doesn't knock. It kicks the door down. It happened on a Thursday night. She was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the counter. Old me would have ignored it. New me? I still didn't reach for it. But the screen lit up, and the preview said enough. A name I didn't recognize. A message that read, "Same time tomorrow?" No emojis. No fluff. Just a quiet sentence that snapped something in place. I didn't unlock her phone. I didn't need to, because I already knew. But that message, it wasn't a dagger. It was confirmation. Of everything. The detachment. The flinching when I touched her. The sudden work events that ran late. The weekends when she was too tired for anything, but somehow energized when she left the house. I used to rationalize. I used to excuse. I even blamed myself. But now I had no excuses left. So I walked to the kitchen, sat in the dark, and waited. She came out of the shower, humming like life was fine. She saw me sitting there, asked if something was wrong. I told her no, because nothing was wrong anymore. Things were finally making sense. She went to bed, and I stayed up. Not brooding, not planning revenge, just observing. I opened my laptop, backed up files, pulled recent bank statements, double-checked locations I hadn't cared to look at before, a few transfers to a name I didn't know, Uber rides to places we'd never been, late-night charges at restaurants we'd never visited together. I didn't confront her. I documented. The next day, while she worked, I scanned the joint account, set up a second credit card, transferred essentials, left enough to keep her comfortable, not because I owed her anything, but because this wasn't about punishment. This was about peace. She noticed the shift that evening. She asked if we could do something fun this weekend. I told her I had plans. Didn't say with who. Didn't say where. She blinked, smiled tightly. The silence between us was louder than anything either of us could have said. That night, I moved half my clothes into a storage unit. Just enough to be mobile if I needed to go fast. She still thought I was here, but mentally, I was gone. And as she slept beside me, unaware, unbothered, I realized something that hit harder than any betrayal ever could. She never thought I'd leave. Not really. And that blind confidence, that was her biggest mistake. The thing about disappearing is, it doesn't always start with a slammed door. Sometimes, it begins with quiet subtraction. A toothbrush removed. A password changed. A gaze that no longer lingers. That morning, I woke up before her. The sun hadn't even broken through the blinds. I got dressed, packed a gym bag, but not for the gym. Inside, my passport, backup phone, spare keys, and the external drive with everything I'd backed up the night before. She stirred as I zipped the bag. Asked where I was going. I told her, just needed some air. And then I left, not just the house. I left the version of me that begged to be chosen. I didn't go far. Just drove around the city with no destination. Parked by the water. Let the silence settle. I watched early risers jog by, couples holding hands, dogs pulling at leashes. People in their little moments, while I planned my exit with surgical calm. The difference between rage and resolve is in the pace. Rage flails. Resolve walks. That week, I kept walking. I opened a private checking account. Rerouted all direct deposits. Paid the rent in advance, but from the joint account, so she wouldn't notice the shift. I started removing myself digitally too. Logged out of shared streaming platforms. Deactivated Find My iPhone. Changed recovery emails on accounts that mattered. Not loudly. Quietly. Precisely. I wasn't deleting my life. I was relocating it. At night, I still came home. Still washed dishes. Still asked about her day. But I didn't listen anymore. She tried harder during those evenings. Made jokes. Touched my arm. Wore perfume she hadn't worn in months. Even cooked, something she rarely did anymore. I gave her soft nods. A smile here and there. But nothing behind the eyes. Because emotionally, I was already elsewhere. And here's the thing. She didn't panic. Not yet. She mistook my calm for acceptance. She thought I'd adjusted. That I'd folded into the new rules of her world, where intimacy could be outsourced and loyalty redefined. She didn't realize I was studying her. I watched how she moved, who she called, what apps she closed when I walked into the room. I wasn't gathering evidence to accuse her. I was studying patterns, So when I left, I'd leave no shadow she could chase. By Friday, my bag was always packed, tucked in the back of my car, just in case I needed to disappear in the middle of the night. She kissed my cheek before bed that night, and I let her. But in my head, I was already gone. Because once a man stops reacting, that's not peace. That's a countdown. By the time the next week rolled around, I had slipped into full invisibility mode. Still there, still visible, but detached, like watching your own life through a glass wall. I wasn't out for revenge. I didn't want to ruin her. But I did want clarity, and not just for me. So I went looking. Not through her texts. Not through her photos. I already knew enough. What I wanted now was leverage, not to use against her, but to sever the web completely. I started with her work. The job where she was too tired after long hours. The office with all the unexplainable team bonding events. The coworkers I'd never met. Never even heard their names outside vague references. One night, I checked her laptop while she was in the shower. She'd left it open. And what I saw wasn't shocking. It was strategic. Expense reports that didn't match. Uber receipts that contradicted her words. Meetings that didn't exist. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a pattern, one she thought I'd never see. But I didn't take screenshots. I didn't send anonymous tips. I printed a single sheet, one line from an internal email chain between her and a supervisor. It wasn't explicit, but it was suggestive enough to raise questions in the right context. I folded it, slipped it into a plain envelope. No name, no return address. Then I mailed it, not to her, to her company's compliance officer. I wasn't trying to destroy her career. I was testing the structure she'd built on secrecy to see how fast it would crack when the right pressure was applied. And I didn't say a word. Not to her. Not to anyone. That Friday, she came home early. Flustered. Said the office was tense. Something about an audit and HR pulling people into side meetings. I nodded. She looked at me like she wanted to ask if I knew something. If I was behind it. But she didn't, because deep down, she believed I was still the man who'd never rocked the boat. That belief kept her off balance. And that was the point. Because power doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from silence. From knowing that you can shift the ground beneath someone's feet without raising your voice. She poured a drink that night. Said nothing. Neither did I. But I saw it. The first crack in her posture. The way her shoulders tensed just slightly. The way she kept checking her phone. Control, the thing she held so tightly, was slipping. And for the first time, she had no idea how to get it back. Because I wasn't fighting. I was vanishing, one calculated step at a time. By the time the HR storm hit her office, the silence between us had settled into something dense. Not heavy with tension, but hollow. Like a room after a fire, where everything looks intact until you touch it. And it crumbles. I was still present. Still polite. I asked if she wanted coffee in the mornings. She said yes. Took it without thanks. The ritual lived on, even if the meaning was dead. That week, I made a few subtle moves. Dinner with her sister and brother-in-law. Just me. I told them she was busy with work. Let them draw their own conclusions. Her sister kept eyeing me like she sensed something had shifted. I didn't confirm it, but I didn't deny it either. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let silence speak louder than denial. She noticed the shift when her phone stopped lighting up with the usual group texts. The brunch invites faded. Her friends didn't comment on her posts like they used to. Even her mother, always loyal to a fault, had grown unusually quiet during their weekly calls. And I knew why. They were seeing it. Not the scandal. Not the betrayal. The unraveling. The way she smiled less. The way her stories didn't add up anymore. The way I was still around, but no longer orbiting her like a loyal satellite. The social fracture wasn't explosive. It was surgical. One person asked, "Is everything okay between you two?" Another added, "You used to look happier." And she hated that more than any accusation. Because she couldn't defend herself with facts. There was no villain in this story. No scene she could replay to prove I'd wronged her. Just absence. Emotional. Social. Relational. And it wasn't just me pulling away. It was her world adjusting. Recalibrating to the version of her that no longer had control. That Saturday, we were at a friend's barbecue. Nothing major. A backyard, some drinks, music low enough to hear yourself think. Someone made a joke about office flings. A few people laughed. Then a friend, not even one of mine, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "You really thought no one would notice?" The music didn't pause. No heads turned. But she froze. Her laugh was too late. Too sharp. She brushed it off, but her hand trembled slightly as she poured her drink. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. That was the beauty of it. You don't have to expose someone who's already unraveling. You just stop holding the thread. I never left. Not physically, at least. But I stopped being an option. The transformation was subtle. I continued to be in the same spaces: living room, bedroom, friends' gatherings. But the gravitational pull she'd grown accustomed to was gone. I was present, but emotionally unavailable. That shift? It cracked her world. That Thursday evening, we were invited to a dinner party. Close friends, familiar faces, laughter floating lazily over appetizers. I drove us there. We walked in. I nodded at people, made small talk. But inside, I watched her. She glided through compliments and anecdotes, but they hit differently. I was nearby, silent, observing, listening. And that silence wasn't safety. It was absence. She hesitated when she noticed people looking at us. At me. At her. The looks weren't pity, they were calculations. She used to be the center of our circle. Now she was orbiting a void. Halfway through the evening, someone jokingly asked, "Still trying to figure you out?" She laughed, forced. I just raised my glass in a silent toast to the old us. She caught my eye briefly. For a second, fear passed across her gaze. Not for my sake, but for hers. Because she realized that even though I hadn't moved, everything that defined me had. And that's when the isolation set in. She tried to draw me in later, offering a story about her day, a memory of better times. I nodded, listened, but didn't lean in, didn't engage. Because the man she used to have, the one who would fold to keep the peace, was gone. I wasn't forbidding her. I wasn't angry. I was indifferent. And that, more than any shouting match, broke her down. At the car on the way home, she was quiet. I turned the ignition. The engine hummed. Outside, the night air was soft, forgiving. Inside, the silence was oppressive. When we got home, she didn't pursue conversation, didn't apologize, didn't ask why, because silence had become the answer. I made coffee as usual the next morning. The routines remained, but the dynamic shifted. She realized she wasn't alone because he was gone. She realized she was alone because he'd changed, and she couldn't reach the man he became. Those familiar spaces, things, places, routines, no longer tethered us. He wasn't off the ledge. He had simply slipped away. And the final horror for her wasn't abandonment. It was that he stayed close, silent, and unclaimed. It was a Sunday. The kind of day she used to spend planning brunches and posting curated snapshots of our perfect life. But now, the house was quiet. Not just quiet, still. I was in the garage, organizing old tools I hadn't touched in months, cleaning the workbench, wiping dust from things that once mattered and now felt like echoes. She came out mid-morning. Her expression wasn't angry. It was desperate. Not loud, measured, controlled. But underneath it, I could see the cracks. Her voice carried that edge, the one people use when they feel the ropes slipping and think a calm tone might hold it together. She asked if we could talk. I said nothing at first, just kept wiping a wrench that didn't need cleaning. Eventually, I set it down and turned toward her. Not with aggression, not with warmth, just neutrality. She began recounting the last few weeks, how different things had felt, how much she missed how we used to be. She mentioned how confused she was by my behavior, how distant I'd become, how I didn't even argue anymore. Then she dropped it, the phrase she must have rehearsed 100 times. I didn't mean what I said that night. It was a bad joke. I was frustrated. You know I'd never. That's when I saw it, her final play, the rewriting of history. She wasn't apologizing. She was editing, trying to soften the moment that shattered everything. She wanted to retell the night. She'd looked me in the eye and said she'd already had her needs met at work. But here's the truth. That moment wasn't about infidelity. It was about replacement. And now, she was trying to undo it with nostalgia and soft tones. I let her speak. I listened, fully, because the best punishment isn't rage, it's clarity. When she finished, I didn't respond with accusations or bitterness. I didn't pull up old receipts or rehash the betrayal. I simply said, "I heard you the first time." She blinked. Then I added, "And that was all I needed." There was no drama, no raised voices, just two people standing in the same space, but in completely different stories. She reached for my arm. I stepped back. She opened her mouth again, but the words didn't come, because she realized something far more terrifying than being hated. She was no longer significant. She hadn't lost to another woman. She'd lost to the version of me that no longer needed her. And for someone who once thrived on control, silence was the loudest loss she could suffer. It started with a missed call, then another, then 3 more, all from a number I hadn't saved but knew by heart. I didn't answer, not because I was being cruel, because I wasn't curious anymore. By the time the voicemail came through, I already knew what she'd say. I could feel it before I hit play. But I did it anyway, not out of hope, just to see how much of herself she was willing to lose trying to win back something already gone. Her voice was low, controlled, but unsteady. She said she'd been thinking a lot about everything she said that night, how it came out wrong, how she'd been under stress, how work wasn't what it seemed. She insisted it was just a joke, one I took too seriously. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because that was her final rewrite, turning the moment she shattered our marriage into a punchline she claimed I misread. She kept talking. She said she missed our rhythm, how I used to bring her coffee without asking, how she hadn't felt safe since I left, even if I never really said goodbye. She ended with this: "I don't think I ever expected you to leave, because you were always the one who stayed." That was the part she finally got right. I had been the one who stayed. Through the emotional distance, the late nights, the cold silences dressed as compromise. I'd given her the benefit of the doubt so many times it nearly cost me my identity. But when she said she'd already handled her needs at work, without flinching, without regret, she severed something permanent. She'd made a choice that night, not about intimacy, about replaceability, about control. And now, I'd made mine. I didn't delete the message. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because by then, my life had already shifted. I was back at the gym 4 days a week. Not for revenge, but discipline. I'd reconnected with friends I'd drifted from. I found a new apartment with light, quiet, and peace. And I'd started seeing someone. Not seriously, just naturally. Her name was Claire. She wasn't a replacement. She was a reminder of what mutual respect felt like. She asked how my day was, and actually listened. She never made me feel like I was auditioning for love. So no, I didn't hate my ex. I didn't love her either. I felt nothing. And that's when I knew she no longer had access to me. Not because I blocked her, but because I healed. It was a rainy Friday when she showed up. No warning. No message ahead of time. Just a knock on my apartment door. Soft. Not desperate. Measured. Like she believed she still had a key, even if it wasn't physical. I didn't answer right away. I stood still, letting the moment breathe. Then I opened the door. She stood there in a beige coat, familiar, worn, the same one she wore that night when everything cracked open. But now, it looked less elegant and more out of place. She didn't speak at first, just scanned the room behind me like she was taking inventory of what was no longer hers. The clean space, the light, the calm. Then she said, "You look different." I didn't respond, not with words, just a look that said, "That's because I am." She stepped closer, barely crossing the threshold. She said she hadn't planned this, that something just pulled her here, that she wanted to clear the air. But it wasn't about the air. It was about the door. She said she realized what she gave up, said she'd been lost, that things at work had been hard, that maybe she had lashed out in ways she didn't fully understand at the time. I let her speak, not to absorb, just to observe. She asked if we could talk. Just talk. No pressure. No expectations. Just revisit what we once had. I told her calmly, "This place doesn't have space for history. Only future." She blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of it, like she expected anger or emotion. But I had none left to give her. She asked if I'd forgiven her. I said nothing. Forgiveness isn't owed, especially to someone who never truly owned their choices. And then, like clockwork, she asked the question I knew was coming. "Is there someone else?" Again, I didn't answer, because the answer wasn't about her. It was about me, and how I'd finally reclaimed the parts of myself she never bothered to know. I didn't invite her in. I didn't slam the door either. I simply stepped back, nodded once, and closed it. Quietly. No drama. No final speech. Just the weightless sound of something ending for real. She stood outside for a while. I could hear her footsteps shifting, uncertain. Then silence. I went back to my evening. Made coffee. Sat with a book. Claire had left her favorite mug by the sink, and I smiled. Not at her, but at the peace her presence didn't disturb. That was my final move. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Just absence. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop showing up where you're no longer seen. And that's exactly what I did. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.